And did everybody have a great time last night? What a great function. Great sponsorship. So we're going to get started here. We'll try to stay on time. You're in the cinematic storytelling. I got a wonderful panel before us, and I'm just going to let them dive right on in. So our first speaker today comes from the city of Austin, Texas, and that's Dan Schaefer. He's a senior video production specialist. So take it away, Dan.
Hey everybody, thanks for coming this morning. Let's see first of all if we can get this, boom. All right, get our first slide. So cinematic storytelling, well what does cinematic mean? And it's one of those terms I think it's kind of nebulous and probably means different things to different people. What I'm going to focus on today is framing. I mean, it sounds really basic, but I think that's the first step in putting together a good visual story. Creative and well-framed visuals. A good frame provides context and subtext to your story. Oh, there we go. Is anybody here old enough to remember 4x3 television? Oh, all right.
Old enough.
Is anybody still shooting 4x3? Yeah, all right. Don't worry, and if you are, because in 5 years it's going to be vintage, and it's going to be like turntables and typewriters, and it's going to be the cool format.
Typewriters.
Yeah, but yeah. So when the industry standard switched over to 16:9, it was really a game changer. It gave us a much wider picture, of course, but it gave us a lot more room within the frame to do creative things and to add elements in that frame that help to move the story forward. Oh, and so to get into this and get into the possibilities of what framing can do to move the story forward, if we can play the video, Rich. And we need audio.
My name is Tony, and this is a quick every frame a painting. One of the best compliments you can give a movie is that it just feels alive. There's something in there that has a pulse that's unpredictable. It's not just the story or the actors, it's in the frames themselves. Consider this short scene from Nicholas Winding Refn's Drive. At first glance, it doesn't seem all that special. But check this out. Cover up half the frame. Notice that the right side of frame tells an entire story about these characters on its own, and the left side tells another complementary story. So a shot that could have told one thing actually tells two, and instead of being bored, our eyes are constantly switching between the two halves of the screen. This time, the dynamic isn't left and right, but top and bottom.
Hi.
Hi. You two know each other.
Don't. Up here, we have a beautiful triangle of faces and a composition full of vertical and diagonal lines. But check out what's happening below. Even though we're not consciously thinking about it, the bottom half of this frame tells an entire story through the hands of the actors.
You two know each other.
Don't.
Oh, look at that.
We're neighbors.
Neighbors. Very good. Well, we'll try to be neighborly, too.
And when we say a film is alive, this is part of what we mean. There are subtleties of storytelling and behavior, not just where we look, but where we don't look. And as you watch Drive, you start to see the pattern. Almost every shot has a compositional balance between left and right, and also top and bottom. A quadrant. At first, this might seem restrictive, but using this basic tool, watch how the director takes a conventional scene and does unconventional things. As the driver enters, he's up in the top left. So naturally, we assume the next shot will have the other person in the top right. But instead, once the shots move closer, we get two characters short-sighted like this, with tons of space behind them. Even though they want to talk, there are other obligations. Once the two men confront each other, notice that they occupy the same quadrant, with their eyes in the same spot, because they're fighting for the same position. Meanwhile, Irene is framed top right or dead center, the object of their affections. Even though she's out of focus, watch her performance.
That's very nice. That's nice of you. Thank you.
The scene finally pays off in this image, balanced between top left and bottom right, letting us visually compare the two men and see the long shadow one casts towards the other. Even though we've seen this exit door since the first shot of the scene, the visual payoff is actually unexpected. And the director, by emphasizing different quadrants, can create shots that are both tightly composed and weirdly unpredictable.
All these priceless cars. One would think you'd have better locks.
If you enjoyed this, feel free to play around with quadrants. They're a very old, simple tool. And you shouldn't copy Refn, just start with the same toolbox and see what you come up with. Remember, you don't need Steadicams or cranes or drones or the latest 4K whatever. You need top, bottom, left, right. And the good sense for how to put them all together.
Okay, well, obviously, probably none of us are ever going to be putting that much detail into our story about the water department or the police recruiting video. But, you know, this is a good chance, and I was having a conversation last night about storyboarding and talking to people who storyboard and people who don't storyboard. At our shop, we generally don't, and, you know, a lot of it is based on the type of programming you do. But yeah, if you do storyboard, even short things, you might put this in your brain and think about when you're planning shots, you know, what else you can do with the frame besides your principal subject matter. So what are the basics of framing? First of all, focus on when you're setting up a shot, focus on the edges of the frame. Keep your eye on what's going on the edges, because that's really what sets a frame. Obviously, we want, you know, our subject matter somewhere in that area of center or center right, center left. But, you know, always keep attention to what's going on in the edges of the frame. It's fashionable right now not to use tripods. And you see it in movies and television every day. Every shot has this little thing going on. Personally, that drives me nuts. I mean, and I do use handheld quite often. But when I do use handheld, it's because I'm in tight, I'm zoomed back all the way, and so that any movement that's going on in the frame is going to cancel out any movement on the edges of the frame. When you set up a frame, roll on it and look for movement in the frame. Anytime you can get a movement in the frame, again, that helps to give dimension to the frame. A good example is if it's a breezy day and you have a tree in the foreground and the tree's moving a little. I mean, that's better than just a static shot. Capturing the moment is really important too. And every shot has a moment, not just the important things you're shooting, but cutaways have a moment. If you're shooting cutaways at a meeting and, you know, a person is doing this and then they suddenly go like that, that's the moment. And what that takes is roll on things a little longer than you normally would. You know, we have a tendency, especially when we're in a run and gun situation where we roll a shot and, okay, I got that, and there's so much going on, you know. Just take a breath and let that shot hang on for a minute. You know, just let it roll, because you don't know what you're going to get within that extra 5 or 10 seconds. Okay, where else are we here? Now we're going to talk about background and foreground. What's out of focus can be as important as what's in focus. Now, if I was editing this today, I would change that to what's out of focus may be as important as what's in focus. Let's go ahead here. So we're talking about depth of field now. And I think everybody here, I'm not going to go into what depth of field here is, because I'm pretty sure most of you people know what depth of field is. And most people nowadays are looking to get a narrow depth of field. These are the elements that essentially make depth of field or help you control depth of field. The first, of course, is your aperture. The wider your aperture, the narrower your depth of field is going to be. Distance to subject. The focal length of your lens. Obviously, a longer lens is going to give you a narrower depth of field. Shutter speed can also control the depth of field. And this is kind of a wild card. Camera sensor size. Come on, baby. Oh, there we go. So with the new generation of cameras, you know, I personally, where we working, we're using the kind of classic 2/3 inch Sony E&G camera with a zoom lens. It has 2/3 inch chips. A lot of the cameras you're getting now, whether they be Canon or mirrorless or what they are, have larger sensor size. Now it seems counterintuitive, but the larger the sensor size, the narrower depth of field you have. And I had a shot that kind of showed that, and we'll get to it here. Boom. Okay, there are two shots. Everything is exactly the same. The aperture size is the same. The distance from camera is the same. The only difference is the camera used. The one on the left is a Canon 30D. The one on the right is a Canon 5D. So the one on the right has, you know, excuse me, has a narrower depth of field. And this, of course, this kind of look now is, I think, synonymous with what most people think of when they think if they want a cinematic look. That's what a cinematic look means to them, is, you know, narrow depth of field. All right, come on. All right, there we go. I was just saying, we work with like thousands of dollars worth of video equipment every day that we master, and we can't master a $500 laptop. This is a clicker. This is a classic. This is a classic foreground background shot. What does this shot do for us? Well, if we just had a shot of the restaurant, it would be okay. They're at a restaurant. But with this shot, first of all, it gives the frame depth. You know, we're still only shooting in 2D. The day of shooting 3D may be a long time off if it never ever happens. But a good foreground shot gives you depth, and this also moves the story forward. Now we know something about this restaurant. Okay, it's a restaurant, but we know it's Stubbs Restaurant in Austin. This is a classic shot, and most often you will see it. The foreground will be a baseball, a basketball, a soccer ball, a football helmet, and behind them will be, and it'll be shot from the ground, and behind them will be, you know, the players. It's kind of a, you know, stereotypical shot that we always try not to do, but when we see it, we just can't help ourselves. We got to get it. Okay, now one thing is, your foreground doesn't always have to be in focus. Again, you get the same depth. You get focus on what is the subject matter of the story. Now, honestly, in this shot, what I should have done, I would have actually panned the camera maybe a little more to the left, so we get the two doors in, and we have just the edge of, that's a tree, by the way. We just have the edge of the tree. This may be a little overdone, but it kind of gives you the idea. Okay, when we talk about out of focus or blur, they actually have a name for it. It's called bokeh or bokeh, depending on what part of Japan you're from, apparently. It means blur, or specifically the aesthetic quality of the blur. So now you have a name to put to it. So next time somebody says, why is your shot out of focus, you can just say, oh, well, it was the aesthetic look I was looking for. Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples of good use of foreground and the bokeh effect. This is a shot from a crime procedural that's on Netflix right now. UK photographers seem to be really good at this. What's unusual about this shot is we have our subject dead center, which generally you don't see in when we're using 16:9 or anamorphic frame. But again, we have the foreground out of focus, the background is out of focus, And if you know something about the story of this, he's a beleaguered politician who's trying to avoid a scandal. And this also gives you kind of a claustrophobic effect of what this character's going through. Behind him, in front of him. I love the rules. This is your standard, two people having a discussion, over-the-shoulder shot. But again, it breaks all the rules. I mean, generally, we would want her more on the right side of the frame to have that look space that we were always told we need to have. But this breaks the rules. It's just a very great shot. And my favorite part of this shot is in the lower right-hand corner, those flowers there. That gives the frame balance, a balance that it wouldn't normally have. Again, this is another shot. We were talking, Tony was talking about top, bottom, left, right, so she's framed extremely left. The person she's talking to is just a ghost. And again, they're telling you a dynamic of that conversation. There's another example of the same thing. This is a crazy shot. This takes place in a high-end restaurant, and there are these, you can't see it here, but there are these glass bowls, crystal bowls that are set out all over the restaurant. So this is actually, again, it's using the far right unconventional framing or far left unconventional framing, but what they're shooting through one of those bowls. And that's what they're using essentially to get their blur or their bokeh effect. What's great about this shot is this was actually a moving shot. The camera is tracking behind her as she walks through this courtyard. Everything is out of focus, including the soldier who salutes her. And that's essentially telling us that she's in her own mind. He's there, but she doesn't see him. I always feel sorry for this guy, because this might have been his first role. And he was telling her, I'm going to be in this movie. And then he turned out to be one of the out-of-focus guys.
About 3 minutes.
3 minutes? Okay, cool. But the question is, well, can we have everything in focus? Absolutely, absolutely. They had the opposite problem back in the 30s of getting things in focus. The film speeds were so slow, the camera lenses were so slow. This photographer, Greg Tolan, was a pioneer in taking shots that were completely in focus. I mean, right down there's a guy on a telephone in back. Another example. This is interesting because it's kind of the exact opposite of the 3 shot we saw a little earlier. You can tell it's a long shot just by the way the subjects are compressed, but they're all in focus. And this amazed people when this was from Grapes of Wrath when that came out. It's like, how did he do that? And of course, after this film, he was tasked to be a cinematographer for the Orson Welles film that I'm blanking on.
Citizen Kane.
Thank you very much, Citizen Kane. And there's another one of Greg's shots. Again, all in focus. So when is it good for us to use a shot that maybe is all in focus? There's a good example. Okay, you know nothing. What does this guy do for a living? He's a farmer. Yeah, he's a model.
He's a model.
You're so cynical. Having a background in focus is a good way to help inform your viewer. Again, add context to the picture. We don't need to have somebody to tell us he's a farmer. We know he's a farmer. And that could be, if he's a pilot, that could be a plane in the background. So there's a lot of ability. The general rule I use is if the background helps us understand the character more, if it puts it in context, if it sets our location, then it's great. If all it is it's busy, and sometimes when we shoot an interview, it's like what's behind them doesn't have any context, then that's when you're going to want to, blur out your background. And yeah, I guess that's it. The only thing I want to say to you is, again, and I'm just going to really reiterate what Dennis said in the editing seminar a couple of days ago. These things are tools that you can explore and you can use. And you know, you'll either stick with them, you'll find they really work for you, or after a while it'll be, it's just too gimmicky, and you'll throw it away. And by doing that over the months and years that you work in your profession, you'll be creating your own style. And you won't even know you're doing it until somebody comes up to you and says, oh, I saw that piece, I knew it was yours. And you'll go, how do you know it was mine? Oh, because it had all the stuff in it that you always do. So that's the main thing, is shoot from your heart and create your own style. That's my thing.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
Great information. All right, next up, our next speaker comes from Montgomery County, Maryland. She's the digital media manager, and it's Shannon Farney.
There we go. How's that? Can you guys hear me? Yeah? Okay, great. So part of my background, I actually have a cinema background. I went to film school, all that jazz. And as such, I frequently run into differences between what I learned in school and what journalism professionals have learned. So I'm doing a lot of basic stuff. You guys, again, probably already know it, but I'm going to go through it real fast in case we don't know it, in case there's some overlap. And then I'm going to break down a couple techniques and talk about what we do in some of our productions, and maybe what we can all do in television production in the future. So, and I've got lights, I've got notes, a whole bunch of notes, and I'm going to refer to them frequently. All right, and who's got the clicker?
Nope.
Right there.
Thank you.
Give
Okay.
it a second.
Cinematic lighting.
There you go.
There we go. So basically, the concept of lighting is the ultimate goal is to create the illusion of a three-dimensional image on a two-dimensional plane. It's that simple. That is really what lighting is for. The two-dimensional plane is, of course, the television screen, the video screen, what have you. The three-dimensional image is three-dimensional in real life, but when the camera sees it, it flattens it out. And our job is to emphasize, recreate that distance, that 3D quality. So first up is latitude. Latitude is simply the range of the visual spectrum which can be perceived by the human eye, by the camera, film camera, video camera, what have you. The brightest brights and the darkest darks. Film cameras traditionally have a wider latitude, especially in shadowy areas. They're better in detail in dark areas. Overexposure causes clipping, especially in HD cameras. If you overexpose your scene, you will lose all the detail in the bright areas, and you cannot get that back in post. Once it's gone, it's gone. Do not overexpose. Do not clip your video. Underexposure is more forgiving, but increasing it in post makes the image kind of grainy. Again, I can live with that. It's generally better to underexpose if you have to than to overexpose, because you can add a little bit more detail in post if you're underexposed, but again, if it's overexposed, it's gone, it's blown out. The inverse square law, are you guys familiar with that? Yes, no, maybe? A couple people? Okay, it's real simple. This is a technical explanation that I stole directly off of Wikipedia. All it means is if I have a light set up 1 foot away from my subject, which is super close, but whatever. If I have a light set up 1 foot away, I move it another foot away, it doesn't decrease by half. You now have 1/4 as much light on your subject. It's something to be aware of when you're setting up lights and adding illumination to your production. Color temperatures, again, basic building blocks of a scene. The two that we pay most attention to is tungsten orange, 3200K, and daylight blue, 5600K. The K stands for Kelvin. It's the scale of measurement in which we measure the color temperature of a scene. And lights have color. Darker lights on the lower part of the Kelvin scale appear more orange, more red, and as you go up in color, it appears more blue. What we see daylight as is actually blue light. The incandescent lights bulbs that you have in your houses are mostly yellow-orange light, but the human eye, and specifically the human brain, is designed to just cancel that out. We just see light without thinking about it, without concentrating on it. And something that we need to do in production is pay attention to which type of light source we're using. Way back in the day, it was considered to be a very bad idea to mix your color temperatures. You didn't want to have daylight blues with tungsten oranges contrasting, but that has loosened up a lot in the last 30, 40 years since I've been working ever. And it's perfectly fine to mix your color temperatures now. You can create a really interesting experience by mixing color temperatures. So. Don't worry, we'll fix it in post. Please don't do this. Once again, many issues, over underexposure, color balance can be fixed. Color correction takes a while, and it's a very subjective process. The color correction I do might not be the color correction that Richard would do. So just strive to get the best image you possibly can while you're shooting, and then worry about fixing it later. Three-point lighting. Again, this is a basic building block of lighting design. Three-point lighting, you have the key light, you have your fill light, and you have your backlight. Some people refer to it as a rim light. That's a separate thing, but it serves the same function. But this is just the absolute basics. You've got your key light in the front. It is the main light. It's the key. That is the light that you design your entire lighting concept around. The fill light is additional, usually softer light, that fills up the space in the area. It adds more detail to the face, so it's not as harsh with just one key light. And the backlight is literally in back of your subject, down, usually below or up at a 45-degree angle, and it's designed to separate your subject from the background. All you do is you put a little bit of rim around their head, and they're no longer fading into the background. Again, this is a basic setup. You can add a kicker, which is a small light that shines a light right at the cheekbone. It gives a little extra detail on a person's face. You can have an eye light, which would be, I'd put it right about where that microphone is, and just shine a little bit of light into the eye of the person that is on screen. It makes it sparkle. You can add ambient lighting. This room is full of ambient lighting. Look around you. You've got lights on the ceiling that have diffusion. You've got can lights. You've got light bouncing off the white walls around us and off the white tabletops. All this is the ambient lighting in the room. It's extra fill light. It's soft. It's filling up the features on the faces in the room around you, and it's adding a general quality to the room. And usually I would add a background light as well. Something shining just directly on the background, again, to establish the mood of the scene and separate it from the person you're filming. This is Star Wars. I have this up here to demonstrate a couple principles. One, I want to talk about color temperature and mood of a scene, gels, and the direction in which you put your fill light on a subject. And this is the real secret, if you will, to cinematic filming. Put your main light on the opposite side of the person's face from the camera. Bam, that's it. I'm done, that's it. I'm not done. But seriously, if you look at films and movies, you will see this over and over and over again. And it didn't make a whole lot of sense when I was first told about it. It seems counterintuitive. Why wouldn't you light the person's face directly so you can see it better? But again, it goes back to we're creating the illusion of three-dimensional space. We want shadows on a face. We want the shadows to outline the person's face so that you see what shape their face is. We're creating additional highlights on the nose, near the eyes. We're creating shadows around the face and the jawline. In this case, they didn't use a rim light at all. His hair is completely fading into the background. This character is torn. I've watched the film. I don't know how many other people have. I'm sure you all have. He's making a moral decision. He's got choices to make. Half of his face is bright red. Half of the face, it didn't come out this well, is dark blue. That's a literal indication that he is torn in two directions, red or blue, good or bad. The lighting is going straight down the middle of his face, and that's not what you would normally do, but this is an exaggerated case. Also, while I have him up here, take a look at the shadow from his nose. It's very distinct. It's going right across his face, but it's not crossing across his lips. That's another important thing to do. A nose on a person's face acts kind of like a sundial. You're going to cast a shadow no matter how you light them, unless it's direct on. Again, we don't want to do that, because creating the illusion of depth. So you have what you call a nose carrot. You try not to send the shadow of the nose directly over the person's mouth, because that cuts out some of the acting, some of the expression that they The traditional Hollywood triangle, with actresses especially, is to cast a shadow straight across the cheek so it merges with the shadows on the cheek and it creates a dramatic look. So let me see. What am I forgetting to talk about here? Oh, right, gels. Color theory. You can change the color of your light by using gels, which is simply colored plastic that goes on the light or occasionally over the camera lens, but not usually. We use gels. Do I have a slide for gels? I don't have a slide for gels. We use gels for basically for color correction. If you're shooting in daylight and you need it to be tungsten light, orange light, slap a corrective gel filter on it. If you are shooting in indoors, yellow light, and your camera is white balanced for yellow light, you need an outdoor look, you can slap a blue corrective gel on it. If you're shooting an old-fashioned, if I'm shooting downtown in the subway somewhere and I've got fluorescent lights flickering above me and they're kind of green, I can put a minus green gel on the fluorescent lights that will cancel out that green light. I might not want to do that. If I'm shooting in the subway, I probably want that flickering green light for added ambience. Okay, here's my gels. Lighting control. You can reduce light with the use of scrims, flags, and nets. The spread, reduce the glare and exposure. Basically, it all comes down to control. If you're lighting cinematically, you want to know what light you're using, where it's at, where it's going, how much of it you're using, how much of it is getting on you, how much of the light is getting on you. I'm going to control that by using lighting control. Flags and scrims. Do you guys know what general lighting equipment is? I'm getting some nods. Okay, good. You can, let me see. You can direct it with black wrap. Barn doors are built onto the lights. You can have gobos or cookies, which are additional things you can use to spread out the light. Gobo simply means anything that goes between the light and the source. And you can change the color and exposure with gels and diffusion. All right. This is a shot from Tom Cruise, The Last Samurai. They were apparently having a lot of trouble on production with shooting outdoors. They'd have a cloudy day, and then they'd have a super bright sunny day. And they can't shut down production entirely to do this. Their lighting design called for soft white light on an overcast day, so they constructed this large SoftBank kit overhead. You can see the rails of it are covered in net in order to not create a sharp shadow of the edge of where the light falls, but to diffuse it a little bit. If you take a look at the center, you can see it's kind of misty, kind of lighter area. It's much more soft, gentle light. Okay, once again, it's to create the illusion of a three-dimensional image on a two-dimensional plane. That's my bad, that's an extra slide. Mise-en-scene is just the entire look of what's in the frame. Everything that you see on video, in camera, is part of the mise-en-scene. It's part of the look of the piece. The lighting, the blocking, the costumes and makeup, the direction people move, everything. Generally, pay attention to your composition in lighting. You want to balance the darker and the lighter elements in a frame because the eye is immediately drawn to the brightest area of the frame. And this slide is actually a pretty good example of that. The brightest area of this slide is that rectangle, mise-en-scene. It's the first thing you look at. It's where the eye is drawn. And it's balanced out by the larger, darker area, the rectangle, which is actually much larger than the brighter, smaller rectangle. It helps balance out the look of the scene a little bit. So when you're designing your scenes, make sure this applies to both things in screen and also people. You want to make sure that people aren't underexposed or overexposed. High versus low key. Now, this is a little bit more cinematic, a little less basic. Key refers to your overall brightness of a scene. High key is a bright scene. Low key is a dark scene. This room that we're sitting in right now, this is a high key room. We've got a lot of ambient light. We've got a lot of light bouncing off the tabletops, a lot of light coming from the ceiling, generally high key. Shadows as accents instead of using highlights as accents. High key is usually in comedies, in commercials, and we use a lot of high key lighting in our productions and television. Low key is generally drama, horror, sometimes in romance, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a horror film. It doesn't necessarily have to be a romance. You can mix and match these as you choose. And you can have a high-key scene followed by a low-key scene. It changes the emotional effect of the production. High versus low contrast is different. When I was first starting out, I mixed these up a lot. Contrast is simply the difference between the blackest blacks and the brightest whites in your scene. Sharp shadows has unfiltered lights. It feels powerful, it feels stark. Low contrast is more dreamy, more gloomy. It can seem depressed, it can seem fantastic. I've got examples of a couple different options here, and for some reason, they didn't, hang on a second. There we go, that's my backup slide. So you can actually see the key and contrast. Spider-Man up in the upper left-hand corner there, that's high key, it's a very bright scene, and it's also high contrast. The wall he's on is super bright, the shadows are super dark. We've got high key and low contrast, this scene from Serenity. It's a very bright situation, but the contrast is low. The darks are not that dark. We've got grays. The brights on her face are not as bright. It's more of a grayish overall tone. Down in the bottom left-hand corner, we have the Addams Family, low-key, high contrast. It's a dark scene, generally speaking. The subject is overall dark. The background is overall dark, with pops of highlights to create contrast. And in the bottom right, we've got Batman Begins, I think, and they're on this glacier, and everything is low. It's a little bit brighter on the computer, but we've got low key, the scene is dark, we've got low contrast, we don't have a whole lot of difference between the dark areas in the scene and the brights, because the brightest areas of the scene, as you can see, are still pretty dark blue. So these are 4 different ways you can combine this. Okay, lighting the background, and we talked about foreground and background briefly when we talked about depth of field. You want to light your background separately from your subject. Lighting the background is something you want to pay attention to. You get the foreground, middle, and background with a plan for each. Your subject is the main focus, but you need to keep in mind the entire design of the piece when you're setting up your lighting. You don't want to light the background and have it dramatically different from the lighting on your subject, unless, of course, that is what you're trying to do and it's a style. Okay, studio production. 4 minutes? All right. I'm going to speed this up. Studio production versus field production. In a studio, as we know, we have overhead lights hanging down, generally pointing at the subjects from a distance. It's a lot like theatrical lighting. You create areas of light and exposure. One of the benefits is you have a dedicated space for your filming. You can set up your set design. You know exactly where people are going to be over and over, and you can establish your lights for those positions. Field production, run and gun filming, you don't have the opportunity to plan out your shots and your lights as much. In fact, you're lucky if you're filming outside on a sunny day and it doesn't suddenly go overcast and change your lighting entirely. Night shots, you might need electrical access for lights, which you don't have. On the plus side, you get more interesting backgrounds than just a studio. It's easier to change the blocking. You just change the person around in the direction you're interviewing, and potential for stunning natural beauty. Okay, second slide on this. Let's see, I did some of these. Digital set or a color wash of gel background is easy to create for a studio set. Most of the time, studios avoid harsh, strong contrast. They go with softer fill on the people's faces. Field production, bright sunlight is a very direct, strong, harsh light, so you might have strong, harsh shadows on your production. If you don't have power for additional lights, you can use reflectors, gold, silver, and white, to literally bounce light onto a person's face, which you may or may not be able to see in here. It's a minimal amount of light. It's not going to add the additional light that you need that if you had a light to plug in and point it at someone's face, but it'll create a soft glow and it'll help out. If you need to, you can rent a generator, which will kill your possibility for recording sound, but you know. And again, control the lights with Silk's butterfly nets. I have some green, blue screen tips if you guys want to see them, but I'm being told to wrap it up, so I'm gonna. A couple moments. Okay. You're good. All right, it's pretty simple. Just the green screen does not have to be bright. It just has to be evenly lit. Do not have hot spots because those will be hard to take away in post. Keep your subjects that you are filming about 10 to 15 feet away from the green screen so that their lighting doesn't overlap. And more importantly, the green screen light doesn't blow onto them. For best results, the people you're filming should be 1 f-stop brighter than the background. People differ on this. Sometimes people say the person you're filming should be darker than the background. Honestly, it's your choice. And always, always, always use a backlight or a rim light to create that separation between the background. All right, this is one of our shows in our studio setup, Seniors Today. We've got, and we always have this same setup for Seniors Today. These seats are in the same position, so the lighting is already set. We've got light coming from overhead. We've got some ambient light in the background. Notice we've got a hair light, a rim light on each one of the participants that's separating them. And they're fairly evenly lit. They're also directly across from each other, so we're not getting a whole lot of dimensionality on their face. If we could put a little bit more rim light on the speakers, that would help a little bit. But again, it's soft, it's lots of ambient fill, and you can see what you're looking at. This is another production. The people are sitting facing directly towards the camera. Again, we have a brighter background and slightly darker light on the hosts. And again, we could use a little bit of rim light, but the guest there, the gentleman, has more light on the side of his face than the camera, and that's generally considered good. This is another one of our shows, and again, the host has a little bit more light on him, partly because of his shaved head, which is reflecting. And one of the things you can do if you need to quickly bump up the amount of lights available is just have your subject moisturize their face a little bit. We could use, again, a backlight or a rim light on our host, and we've got a much brighter background with more contrast than we do in the general scene. I would take out the sheets of paper if possible, and I would take out the bright white mug, and then we've got a nice low contrast, fairly low-key scene. Also, look at the top of the TV screen up there. There's a little white bar. That's a reflection from the light ahead. You can take care of that by just putting some black gaff tape over it. This is a show that some of the teenage members of Montgomery County have created. And the two hosts over on the right side write, produce, and create this show, which is fantastic. And their background choice of gels drives me nuts. It's green, blue, and red, and it's very dark. This is a very overall low-key production. That sounds bad. It's low-key. The whole set is dark. I really want a backlight or hair light on both of those two hosts. Their heads are vanishing. Okay, but the choice of clothing is pretty good. The brightest area in this whole shot is this guy's sneakers. And we could fix that by, I guess, A, asking him to take off his shoes, which is not really a solution. B, changing the framing, or C, yeah, that's pretty much it. One of the things we can do is, the second brightest area in the show is the reflection off of the chairs. So again, a little black gaff tape just taped to the chairs would do a lot of good in that one. And yeah, I think one more. Okay. I'm gonna skip through here. This is a show we do where we actually set up lights on location, and it's much more cinematic. We've got the background, again, we've got two bright areas in the background, but we've got some interesting dynamics going on. And we're lighting the gentleman, the interviewee, again, from the same side as the camera. We could create a little bit more interest if we had a light on the other side, crisscrossing and illuminating each one of them. And finally, this is the best thing that we've done in quite a while. This is a fantastic shot. It's outdoors. It's taking advantage of the natural light that's available. It's an overcast day, so it's not too bright. We don't have sharp, harsh shadows on the woman's face, but we do have shadows. Got a little outline on her nose and on her forehead. The log cabin on the side is taking down some of the available light. but we're getting more light on the far side away. And we've got the depth of field. We've got something going on in the background, but it's not too distinct. It's not distracting from the scene. This is an excellent composition. Okay, and I've got reflectors, gels, lights, and helpful links. And that's all.
All right. Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah. Sorry that took so long.
Next up comes from Northern Dakota County, Minnesota, and we have Tommy Plottick. Take it away, Tommy.
Hello. All right, so I'm here to talk about some camera movement. Otherwise, I like to call it interpretive gimbal dancing. So you kind of get, it's almost graceful, like swan-like, you know, you can kind of get some, depending on what one you're using, I guess, a dual handle or a single. But that's the, has anybody, anybody have a gimbal in here by chance? Awesome. With like GoPros or with, for DSLR mirrorless camera or? Cool, awesome, very good. Yeah, so I'm just gonna show you what I have, how I've been using it, and how we use it at our station. And it's really nice because you can, it's a subtle way to put minimal, simple, but yet engaging for interviews, even for B-roll, anything like that. The interviews are not the handshake handheld, but you can get that real nice, subtle, minimalistic type of movement for it. And I think when you think about cinematic storytelling and what one of the ones that always comes to mind when you're thinking of movement is The Revenant. And I think they did a really awesome job, the two cinematographers on that I mean, they had jibs and Steadicam stabilizers for all their really nice cameras. But now, as it advances, as we get more technology, we're able to get a lot of those tools and more affordable and more, you know, for any level of videographer or cinematographer. So the one that I use is a 3-axis gimbal, and I was able to find one picture so you can at least see what I have here. All right, so this is with a mirrorless camera on it. It's a Panasonic GH5, and I am using it as a pistol grip. The reason why I chose this camera, and this gimbal actually, is because of its 360-degree motors that it has on it, and you can actually, I could take that handle and flip it all the way upside down with that, and then that way I can get nice low shots and even continue with the full motion to actually bring it back to that upright position. I'm actually even sending a Wi-Fi signal from my camera to my phone, using it as an external monitor. And in this case, I decided to use the autofocus option, it looks like, because maybe I'm not, maybe I'm just doing this, but you can actually control the camera by touchscreen on what you're focusing on that. And that sometimes helps with gimbal. I try to stay away from it now, and I've been using a high peak, I guess, tool that shows what's in focus by showing the peaking lines on the camera here. So with that, we have, this is the actual gimbal right here. I'm embarrassed to tell you what I paid 2 years ago for this, now that it's at $398, but that's for the real basic. So this can actually flip over and be your dual handle if you have somebody doing a follow focus. But I like that single hand just because you're able to reach around and actually still control your focus if you're not using a prime lens. I think a lot of people have heard of them. A lot of people have gimbals, but I think the thing is like, why are they important? What's the importance to them, and why should they be used even in our line of work when we're doing either news packages? It could be that we aren't doing storyboard and scripted out type video. And I think for interviews, it's a way to keep the audience engaged, and it's also a way to prolong a talking head. So if you have a lack of B-roll or not interesting type cover footage that you might have, you can then have a shot that's giving some sort of motion, some sort of movement to it, and you can leave it up for a little bit longer to either it's just a simple pan on a tripod or you're handheld with the gimbal. And actually I have, while I'm talking about this is from a production service that we did using that same setup, and there's no sound to it, and this just took it out. But this is just me sitting there with my gimbal kind of bouncing back and forth. It's kind of, you almost have to play the guessing game with it just a little bit, because you want her to nail her soundbite on the right exact time that you're moving when you're not in that kind of, on the back end of it. But I think it's a cool way to kind of keep them up on screen a little bit longer. They're starting to do it, I think, a little bit more I've even seen with political ads and stuff. If you have a politician or a city official that wants to do a PSA or something like that, and they really want to look right into the camera and actually engage with the viewer, it's a good way. This one, we had her looking off the screen, but it's a kind of cool way just to kind of keep it up still. And you can see I had my backlight on her right there. So this is just on tripod with just a pan. So you don't need a gimbal even to do it, but you can at least leave that person up on screen for a little bit longer and maybe use your good, nice cuts a little bit later on. So that's with the interview. I think you can also, it's very helpful in B-roll as well too, when you're actually using it to show your footage and your B-roll, and it's able to give it again that simple yet just a little bit more movement. You can leave up the shot a little bit longer. It's going to be able to cover that any cuts that you're making with the talking head or the interview if you have one on there. And then it just gives that cinematic when we're talking about composition, when having a subject or objects in your foreground, and to actually have something in your foreground and maybe just do a nice slide out from it, and then reveal your subject coming into frame, or whatever you're shooting. I just kind of, when we're saying cinematic, it's like that's what I kind of see, and I kind of just, it's always moving. Even with the drive examples that you had, they were on some sort of, when they were coming inside, on some sort of steady cam or stabilizer like that. So another thing here that I can talk about is actually I'm going to play a video here first, because then I also wanted to talk about, because a lot of these cameras have slow motion in there too, and I know if anybody looked at the footage that Jonathan shot for the editing workshop, they had a nice slow motion footage in there, and it looks really cool when the sun peeks out from behind something that kind of takes it away, and then it pops back out, and it's a cool way. But I'll show you kind of how I used it in some of the news type packages as well. So I think you can take this and still apply it, even though you may be doing MPPA style type stuff. You can still really use this motion within your story and actually help it strengthen it.
Excelsior Rescue 12 on scene. Excelsior Rescue 12 on scene.
County level overdose. Time 13:44.
As Scott McLean looks back upon his life, recalling the memories of his 85 years, he looks at his legacy, like serving as fire chief in Inver Grove Heights.
I came on the fire department in '62. We were a very small community at that time. We weren't part of the city, it was a township.
But his memories were cemented long before his time as a firefighter, forged in a hard but valiant upbringing.
I was raised during the Depression, where there wasn't any money, and pretty hard pressed. And I worked in the drugstores, I worked in the grocery stores. When I was in grade school, making 3 cents an hour, and then I got raised to a nickel.
But the tough times growing up in St. Paul paled in comparison of what was to come.
Communist forces attacked the Republic of Korea. This attack has made it clear beyond
When
all
Truman
doubt.
declared war on Korea, it was really a shock because a lot of these World War II veterans were recalled. And some of them had been through hell in World War II. Now they're back out there again, somebody shooting at them.
A teenager just out of high school,
Everybody was very patriotic in those days.
coming to age quickly.
So I joined the Navy at age, well, actually at age 16. The only advice I got from my father was keep your mouth shut and your ears open. So
In wartime and after, the Navy was McLean's calling.
coming from a Navy family, I guess when I was promoted to Chief Petty Officer was a big thing in my life, one of those lifetime goals.
A dream that's being honored and remembered through an honor flight, a nonprofit organization that takes war veterans on day trips to Washington, D.C. to visit war memorials.
I'm happy to go if I'm going to go someplace. I love Washington, so I don't care whether I've been to that Arlington Cemetery 100 times, but I always feel bad.
And at the end of the trip, a welcome home, a celebration fitting for a hero. Recognition for a life
Welcome home. Thank you for your service.
dedicated to community and to country.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, okay? Have a great evening.
That was awesome. I didn't expect that.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. That's wonderful.
It's clear that by looking around his house, that McLean's many honors are recognized. But what's reflected in the other photographs is what he's most proud of.
My family is my backbone. What more could I ask? They all help me. They're all a pride of my life. Let me tell you, I really appreciate it all more than anything else.
For Insight 7, I'm Adam Carter.
So a lot of that was shot, actually some was shot in slow motion as well too, so I could have mentioned that beforehand, but a lot of that was, in the airport stuff was all handheld. There was shaky parts in it, but it was right when he was coming, and I went out of focus because it's such a more of a narrow depth of field that I have with the mirrorless camera, and just harder to kind of get your hands around and actually use it for that. But had to leave it on there because it was a moment, and it was something that I couldn't say, oh, well, my technique wasn't perfect for it to not have it in the story, because that was like the main part of that story to have it. So I think also in there, when Dan mentioned to try new things, and I loved looking at the Netflix examples as well too, because when I watch documentaries on there, I always, you're always sitting there watching like what they're doing, how they're doing it, and I found one of them. I think it was called Wild Wild Country. I don't know if anybody saw that one, but I noticed that they had really wide and in the center interview shots, and then also had like something like that, and then their cut shot, their second camera they were in like the front third of the actual screen instead of the back third. So again, like breaking those rules, and I thought it was just really cool because it then also tied back in all those pictures that he has, and I think that kind of came to when it says, he's obviously very proud of his family, and his whole basement is just full of their pictures. So with the slow motion, I think shots in slow motion just look cool to be in general. If you want to go cinematic, this camera here actually shoots at 180 frames per second, and this is being recorded at 60 frames per second. So if I was doing 24 like I did in that last piece, then it would have been a little even more slow. But these shots are just something I did last week for a production service. So I just quickly half color correction job on him just to get him out here so he can see. So I was shooting in V-Log with these two to help with that high dynamic range of the sky, the darks and the blacks, the contrast. So, so just with, I mean, those shots turned out really nice, and we'll see what gets used for the piece. Maybe none of them fit, but that's me riding a bike, holding this gimbal upside down like this, and then riding with it too. So, yeah, that was the back tire, I think, of mine right there that I was riding. So, exactly, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and it's just trying it out. It may not have worked. It may, but it turned out pretty well, I think. So. Yes.
Yes, Jody. Good answer.
No, so, and then I think so that story would have been really boring, I think, because there really was no cover that I had to work with besides all the stuff that's on his walls, and I think those little bit of motion shots with him actually helped add to it a little bit more. So that's how they can kind of spice up your B-roll a little bit too. There's another one here that all it was a guy. It was about bullying and music against bullying. And this guy, I can't see where the grab here is. He started a nonprofit for a good reason here that we'll find out. But all I had for cover, they didn't do their concert or anything. All I had for cover was where it's like, well, you want to play the drums for me? And so he was just playing the drums the whole time. And so this is what I was able to.
Avenue in South St. Paul, a jam session is almost always underway.
You'll always be able to find a guitar, you'll always be able to find drums, pianos, whatever interests you. You'll always be able to sing.
But for Tim Leonard, who runs this music shop, he's jamming with a purpose. Last fall, Tim woke up with an idea.
It was like a light bulb. I'm gonna throw a concert,
The idea was born out of tragedy.
We had 2 suicides, both young kids. It's definitely a tribute to my past, a tribute to the people we've lost, and it's trying to make a difference, trying to prevent a suicide, trying to prevent somebody from being upset if we can.
What resulted was a day of music, uniting 8 bands and supporters, united against bullying.
I wanted to be able to bring everybody together, and especially on stage show that, hey, we can do hip hop, blues, rock, all on the same stage.
The concert raised $1,000 for the South St. Paul School District, money specifically meant to combat bullying within schools.
So that one kind of shows a little bit of using it to help push the story along too with the slowing down. I think I could made it fit a little bit better than just going to random slow motion with how it kind of got a little bit darker. When you're shooting slow motion, at least on my camera, and I think a lot of them, it's a variable frame rate where you don't get sound while you're doing it too. So finding those sound bites from other parts where I was actually recording and then actually slowing those down as well too to kind of match his hits. And there's another shot that I think worked out pretty well in here in the back end, but we'll see another one. The side camera, I was shooting 4K so I could scale in post-production and actually keyframe a little bit of motion to it. So I think basically you can overdo it. I've probably overdone it a couple times myself even, but I think you can find certain times when you can use it. Sometimes I like going in with a smaller camera too because of the actual subject as well too. If they were nervous about doing it, sometimes our big ENG with the 2/3 lens on it, and which is an awesome camera. I I just did another shoot that I would never have brought my mirrorless camera to anyways, to actually shoot that, because you can't get those nice tight shots like you can and zoom in and be from a distance getting those. So this one here, it was just did last week, and it is on a woman in Inver Grove Heights here.
More emojis were part of everyday communication. Sandy was focused on faces.
There's nothing better on earth.
In Inver Grove Heights, a cloudy day can keep the sunshine away, but it can't keep the smiles from Sandy.
I'm just a smiley-faced lady. You can't not laugh.
For her, painting smiles and happy faces,
It makes me smile.
is therapeutic.
It really does. It makes me smile.
And you could say yellow
It's just the simple things in life.
is becoming
If it's yellow,
of smiling Sandy.
we have to have it.
What started out as a color for smiling faces started to brighten up other things inside her home
This is a coffee shop.
and then out.
Yay! Yellow makes me feel so happy.
Her therapeutic paintings emerged after her husband passed away 4 years ago.
He was my best friend, soulmate, husband, lover. But I got a lot of good memories. You know, you want to think of the happy things. Smiley faces. With the shed,
And the yellow
it's yellow.
covered up the blues,
The neighbors enjoy it, I think.
and then the trees,
Are you ready for this? You never saw it yellow.
and then everything else.
We're talking imagination in this yard. The whole yard just is happy. It's moving. People walk by and they look at the yard and they smile. Or they'll drive up the street, slow down, and they'll take their phone and just like this.
Through color and a shining personality.
You look better when you smile, so smile.
Smiling Sandy
One of my favorites.
brightens up those around her.
There's a lot of unhappy people in the world, and it's a dark world. And if I can brighten up this little corner,
For Insight 7,
so be it.
I'm Adam Carter.
Thank you. So in closing, I think just kind of, I think we heard it best from, was it Ken Stone at a MACTA conference, and he said, try new things, and if you fail, at least you fall forward. And I think that's like an awesome expression, because I learned from myself every single time, and I could rip apart each one of my projects, but it's just trying to advance and get better and build your craft in that storytelling as well too. So
Excellent. Thank you, Tommy. So we got about 5 minutes. I'd like to open up the floor for any kind of questions that you might have. We just ask that you come up to the microphone, introduce yourself, tell us where you're from. Anybody got any questions out there? No? Then I'm going to ask a big favor. Everybody's got the app on their phone. The only way we can find out how we're doing up here is to hear from you guys. I really encourage you all to go to this session. You can rate us, give us feedback, let us know what you want to hear, what you want to see next year, what you want Natora to bring to you guys. If you give us feedback, we can do a better job at doing that. So I don't see any questions. So yes, go ahead. Come on up.
Hi, my name is Winter Kuharski, and I'm from Champlin, Minnesota. My question is for, I'd say most for Tommy. So I noticed that in a lot of your shots, when you're setting up your B-roll, you have these interesting sort of like fly-on-the-wall shots of your subject. How do you go about capturing those moments without too much coaching? So if you have a subject that maybe is kind of, they've not been on camera, they're kind of awkward, how do you get them to look authentic without making it look like you asked them to touch something, or so it's not too scripted? Mm-hmm. Does my question make sense?
Yes,
okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
And I got with like the Scott McLean one, where the guy in the wheelchair, and like one of the shots was him reaching into my camera, pulling himself in there. I was there interviewing him for about 4 hours or so. And I saw him go up and down that stair, or his, or that chair lift, you know, multiple times. I think about 2 times before I actually even shot that. So he did that same thing. You know, it was a slow process. That always helps when your subject's a little slower, so you can get set up and whatnot. And you get more contrast if you have wrinkles as well too, so that always helps. But for your subjects, but it's more so, I think, just like Sandy when she was walking around her house, you know, walking by. You know, I told her that I'm just gonna go get some shots over here, you know, and that's what's nice, I think, about having the smaller camera. It's because it's not a huge lens pointing right at your subject. It looks like, if I had you know, I don't know what it looks like for outside people looking at it, but it would probably look like I was just getting a shot of her wheel or something like that. And we were walking around her house, just she was telling me the meaning of each little thing that she had in there, and so I was like, oh, I'm gonna go back and get a shot of this wheel here, and so I left her from right over there. So I think. And I draw out a lot of my questions while I'm talking too, even if it's just me beating around the bush a lot, you know, or just doing uhs or ums, like, oh, so, you know, and then kind of just trying to get it to be a little bit more natural. Sometimes I would point even at, to see, like, what did you say that was again over there? And then she kind of starts walking towards it a little bit, so that one I'll ask questions. I learned that one from Dennis, or he always asks, or what'd you say? You know, or what was that? You know,
what was that?
So they kind of say it again, or they do it again, or it's like, wait, what one was the budding flower? And then she points at it like, it's this one, idiot. And then so it's kind of, you know, and then I'm like, oh, okay. But now I have her hand moving in and out of the shot, you know, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Hi, Rick Elrod from Fairfax County. I'm asking about maybe a newbie question, but on Shannon's Batman Begins shot, the contrast, I could see the contrast of light and dark. It also looked kind of monochrome. I was wondering whether color contrast played into that as well.
Sure. Generally, the contrast is considered on a gray scale between dark darks and white whites and gray. But yeah, the color contrast definitely plays into it. Color theory is a whole thing. And the general blues, the subdued blues that they chose, not much difference between the dark blues and the lighter grayish blues, consists of a whole depressive palette. It's oppressive in its own way. It's a harsh landscape. It's showing the struggles that the character is going through at this point. They're in a very literally a deep place.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to give one last shout out to my wonderful panelists here. When we had our conference call 3 weeks ago, they kind of threw me in as the moderator, and these 3 individuals worked this out, and I thought they really gave a great presentation today. They touched on a different subject, and so let's give them another nice round of applause. Thank you, all 3 of you.
Thank you.
Thanks again for coming, and I believe we're up for a break.
Awesome.
You bet. Thank you. Thanks. Excellent.